They said no caregiver had ever lasted in that mansion. Not one. The towering, modernist gates of the estate, carved into a cliffside in the wealthiest corner of Carmel by the sea, were the kind of sight that made passers-by stop and stare. Every slab of polished concrete along the driveway gleamed, as though no human foot had ever touched it. Rows of wind-sculpted cypress trees lined the path, their gnarled branches reaching out, offering a somber greeting reserved only for the most distinguished guests. Beyond them stood the pristine glass and steel structure, grand, imposing, and cold. It was like a fortress for the modern age, perfect to the point of seeming unreal. But inside those walls was a battlefield. At the heart of it was the master of the house, Alistair Blackwood. Alistair was only 62, a reclusive tech billionaire who had built an empire from code. People whispered about him endlessly, calling him a tyrant, a genius trapped by his own impossible standards. Yet even his harshest critics couldn't deny one thing. He was formidable, tall and silver-haired, with a presence that filled every room. Alistair's piercing gray eyes radiated intellect and danger. He didn't simply walk. He moved with the unnerving quiet of a predator. Even a morning coffee required a ritual of precision. A cloud of cold authority lingered wherever he went, as if to remind everyone of his absolute, untouchable control. But his genius came with a frightening streak of cruelty. His words were clinical scalpels, able to cut deep and leave wounds that never healed. Alistair was infamous for dismissing caregivers without warning. A condescending remark, a dismissive gesture, or a cold glare could come at any moment without reason. The most terrifying part wasn't the anger. It was the venom of his classism. Every caregiver in the household was a struggling immigrant, and every one of them had endured his insults about their background and perceived lack of sophistication. He called them slow, inefficient, unrefined, his gaze dripping with contempt if anyone dared to misplace a single object. In the mere year since his wife's passing, 9 caregivers had fled the mansion. Some left in the dead of night, their pride shattered, vowing never to return, even if it meant facing destitution. Others slipped away before dawn, too afraid to glance back. One had even abandoned her meager belongings, walking miles in the cold fog until she reached the town, too desperate to risk another moment in that house. She fled as if looking back once would seal her in a nightmare forever. These men and women had all endured life's hardships before, but the psychological torment and deep-seated prejudice from Alistair broke them. They surrendered, fleeing the hell that disguised itself as heaven. Locals began whispering about the Blackwood curse, that no caregiver could last a month there. Some even warned young people not to take the job at all, for fear of wounds no amount of money could heal. Alistair himself dismissed the rumors entirely. To him, it was simply a matter of finding competence. Caregivers were nothing more than disposable components, no different from his smart devices, replaceable at will. Every morning he awoke in his minimalist bed, surrounded by perfection. Yet behind those gray eyes lay nothing but an unsettling emptiness. Even his estranged son, Julian, a compassionate artist who lived in the city, stayed away, unable to bear his father's coldness. As long as the house remained a flawless monument and his privacy was untarnished, Alistair's revolving door of caregivers didn't concern him. But the so-called curse was about to face its first true challenge, because a new woman was stepping through those steel gates, a young Filipina woman with fierce brown eyes and a spine of steel. Her name was Isabella Reyes. Unlike the others, Isabella hadn't come to hide or to give up. She had come to fight, to endure, no matter the cost in patience or pain, and her arrival would change the Blackwood estate forever. That morning, pale silver sunlight streamed through the gnarled cypress trees, casting a surreal glow over the concrete drive leading to the Blackwood estate. Yet for Isabella Reyes, that gentle light could do nothing to ease the knot of nerves twisting inside her. Standing before the massive gates, she gazed at the cold glass mansion with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Slung over her shoulder was a small, worn backpack, containing only a few plain changes of clothes and a photograph of Leo. Her little brother, lying in a hospital bed at a San Francisco public hospital. Leo was the reason Isabella was here, the reason she was willing to step into what everyone called a prison, wrapped in a billionaire's dream. Leo had just turned 16, but he'd never known a normal teenage life. His fragile body needed a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. Isabella knew it, but she also knew the staggering cost was far beyond her means. And so, despite all the horror stories she'd heard about the master of the house, Alistair Blackwood, Isabella had chosen to stake everything on this job. 3 months, she told herself as she pressed the gate's intercom. Just 3 months, and Leo will have a chance to live. The gate slid open, revealing Mrs. Finch, Alistair's longtime head of house, her face as severe and unreadable as stone. Mrs. Finch's eyes swept over Isabella from head to toe, lingering longer than necessary on her simple clothes, as though they were a flaw to be noted and filed away. "Follow me, Mrs." Finch said curtly, offering no greeting, no introduction. As Isabella stepped into the courtyard, she could feel the weight of other eyes on her. Arthur, the chauffeur, stood near a gleaming black Tesla, his sharp gaze appraising her as if calculating how long she'd last. In the kitchen's picture window, Genevieve, the famously strict chef, watched with arms crossed, her expression detached, as though Isabella were nothing more than a passing stranger. They were all weathered by the master's moods, and in their eyes was a single, unspoken message. "You don't belong here." Mrs. Finch led her into the grand, open-plan living room, where the black slate floors gleamed as if no foot had ever touched them. Before leaving, she tossed out a short command. "Polish the chrome. The master will be down shortly. No instructions, no context, just a cold order." Isabella understood what it meant. This wasn't simply about cleaning. It was a reminder of the place they'd already decided she belonged. She silently picked up a microfiber cloth, knelt, and began to wipe the base of a sculpture slowly, meticulously, leaving not a fingerprint behind. "Do it well. Don't lose this job," she told herself. But just as she finished the last careful stroke, the whisper, quiet hum of an elevator door echoed from the hallway, each silent step that followed measured, proud, and edged with a kind of quiet menace. Alistair Blackwood appeared at the end of the hall, his piercing gray eyes fixed on Isabella. He wore a simple black cashmere sweater that fit his lean frame, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. One hand held a glass tablet, the other rested lightly on a steel railing, the way a king might survey his domain. His gaze moved slowly from Isabella's face to her clothes, then to the worn hands gripping the polishing cloth. His lips thinned, not in anger, but in disdain. "The new one?" he asked, his voice cold. "Yes, sir, my name is Isabella," Isabella replied, bowing her head politely. Alistair didn't answer. He stepped closer, glancing over the spotless chrome. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pressed his thumb against the polished surface, leaving a perfect, oily print against the mirror finish. Isabella recoiled in surprise, looking up at Alistair, who only gave a cool sigh and shook his head, as if Isabella had committed some unforgivable error. "This house," Alistair said softly, each word like a shard of ice, "was perfectly clean before you stepped into it. I'll never understand why they keep sending me unfocused, clumsy people like you." Around them, other staff paused their work, curiosity pulling their eyes toward the scene. Alistair knew it. That was the point. Humiliating Isabella in front of everyone. "Fix it now," he ordered, his tone almost bored as Isabella dropped to her knees again, scrubbing while whispers of speculation floated in the air. Isabella's face burned with humiliation, but she didn't cry, didn't protest. In her mind, there was only Leo, waiting, hoping his sister would come back with a chance to survive. 3 months, she whispered again, her voice a vow. "I will not lose this job." It was in that quiet resolve that Isabella unknowingly took the first step into a battle, one that would pit her against the most powerful man in this storm-laden mansion. 3 months. Just 3 more months. Isabella repeated the words in her mind each morning, like a quiet prayer, as the foggy dawn light seeped through her window. Her small room, tucked far from Alistair Blackwood's main wing, had once been a minimalist office, now dressed up with the genteel title of the Caregiver's Suite. The white walls were bare, the narrow bed firm in the corner. But Isabella never complained. She hadn't come here for comfort. She had come to survive, for both herself and her brother. After that first incident with Alistair Blackwood, Isabella knew she had to stay on high alert. To Alistair, Isabella wasn't just a caregiver. She was an imperfection, a variable to be tested for endurance and pride. The first test came the very next morning. As soon as Isabella stepped into the kitchen, Mrs. Finch glanced at her coolly, then jerked her chin toward a high-tech espresso machine. "The master wants his coffee every morning," she said flatly. "Exactly 75 grams of beans, water heated to 93 degrees Celsius, never 92, never 94, and not a single ground in the cup." Isabella nodded quietly, selecting the correct beans from an airtight canister. She measured the coffee on a digital scale, programmed the machine, and carefully filtered the final product. Her hands were small but steady, her eyes focused. When she set the perfect cup of coffee on the tray, Genevieve, the cook, gave her a brief, surprised look, as though she hadn't expected Isabella to succeed in such a deceptively simple task. But when Isabella brought the drink to Alistair's study, the master didn't even glance at her. Alistair lifted the cup, took a small sip, and immediately frowned, as if he'd tasted something vile. "Too acidic," he said blandly, his tone edged with malice. "Didn't I make myself clear, or is your comprehension just as poor as your work?" Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, but quickly bowed her head. "I'm very sorry, sir. I'll remake it right away. She never got the chance." In an instant, Alistair's hand tilted, sending the cup crashing into a steel wastebasket. The clatter echoed in the silent room. "Clean it up," Alistair ordered, his voice ringing through the space. "I don't want to be surrounded by your carelessness." Isabella knelt, her fingers stinging as she retrieved the broken porcelain. She didn't cry, didn't complain, just cleaned until the mess was gone. Inside her mind, she saw only Leo's frail smile, his pale face in that hospital bed. That vision was the only thing that kept Isabella steady. Alistair watched her, the corners of his mouth tightening in a strange dissatisfaction. Isabella's quiet endurance seemed to fuel him, inspiring even crueler tests. In the days that followed, Isabella woke before sunrise, organizing every part of the mansion so that not a book was out of place. Yet, no matter how perfect her work, Alistair always found a reason to humiliate her in front of the staff. One afternoon, as Isabella arranged the books in the library by color, Madeline paused beside her. "Are you sure you understand the Dewey Decimal System?" he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I've heard people from your country aren't very organized. I hope you're not ruining my collection." Soft snickers rippled among the nearby staff, their curious eyes stabbing at Isabella's pride. She kept her head down, swallowing the hurt, continuing to work as if she hadn't heard. Alistair stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Isabella could hear. "I won't stop until you take the hint and leave this house." The words were sharp and icy, but Isabella looked up just once, her gaze filled with quiet resolve and a shadow of sorrow. "I'll do my best, sir," she replied calmly, so unexpectedly steady that Alistair froze for a moment. "Good," Alistair said, regaining his composure, "because I've only just begun." As Alistair's imposing figure disappeared down the wide hallway, Isabella drew a deep breath, steeling herself. Every day she stayed, every insult she endured, brought her one day closer to saving Leo, the brother she loved more than life itself. Alistair had warned that he'd only just begun, and his words quickly proved true. Tension inside the Blackwood mansion escalated until Isabella could no longer sense the passing of days. On Thursday morning, she woke as usual before dawn, the faint light barely enough to guide her as she gathered what she needed for another day's work. But something was different. The closet door, always shut tight, now stood slightly ajar. A chill prickled her skin as she approached and pulled it fully open. Empty. The simple gray uniform she always hung neatly the night before was gone. In its place, dangling from a hanger, was a gaudy, brightly colored tourist t-shirt, so cheap it seemed ready to dissolve in her hands. For a long moment, Isabella stood frozen, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The message behind it was unmistakable. "You're nothing more than a cheap caricature in this house." Drawing a deep breath, she closed her eyes and steadied herself. She couldn't let Alistair see her break. She wouldn't hand him that victory. Calmly, she turned to her suitcase and pulled out a faded blouse and worn slacks, the clothes she'd worn before taking this job. When she stepped into the mansion's main dining room to begin breakfast preparations, curious eyes from the other staff locked on her. Mrs. Finch, the strict housekeeper, showed open surprise tinged with disdain. Genevieve and Arthur muttered to each other, sneaking glances laced with quiet mockery. But nothing compared to the moment Alistair entered. He swept in, wearing a flawless gray suit, his gaze snapping instantly to Isabella's outfit. In seconds, his expression shifted. "What is this?" he demanded, his cold tone a blend of irritation and smugness. He moved closer, as if inspecting a malfunctioning device. "I'm sorry, sir," Isabella replied before Alistair's temper could ignite. "My uniform went missing, so I had to wear my own clothes today." Alistair paused, then let out a low, cutting chuckle that rang through the vast room, drawing every eye. "Oh, really?" he said blandly, venom threading his words. "Or is it that you're simply more comfortable in rags? People like you must be used to clothes like that by now." Whispers rippled among the staff, but Isabella stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. She knew Alistair was trying to provoke her, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Isabella's silence only deepened Alistair's irritation. His voice rose, determined to strip Isabella down in front of everyone. "Look at her," Alistair said, gesturing toward Isabella. "This is exactly why I have to replace the help so often. I don't know where they find people like this. Inefficient, uncultured, bringing nothing to my home except their mediocrity." He stepped closer still, his voice dropping low, sharpened to a blade. "Do you think your background gives you the right to behave however you please here? This isn't the third world village you're used to. There's no place here for someone as common as you." The air in the room seemed to still. No one moved, no one spoke. Isabella felt each word pierce her like a needle, the pain tight in her chest, stealing her breath. But she refused to cry. Not now, not in front of Alistair, not in front of anyone. She bowed her head slightly, her voice calm, so calm it startled even herself. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll do better." That simple reply hit Alistair like a slap. He'd wanted Isabella to crumble, to cry, to snap, anything that would justify throwing her out. But Isabella didn't give him that. She accepted every insult with unnerving composure. Alistair turned sharply, his hands curling into fists as he walked away, rage simmering. He realized for the first time he was losing control. Isabella's calm was her defiance, and it was working. Behind him, Isabella returned to her cleaning as if nothing had happened. But deep in her heart, a silent prayer rose. "Leo, I will not give up." From the moment Isabella calmly endured Alistair's cruel humiliation, she knew the psychological war inside the Blackwood mansion had escalated to a dangerous new level. What she didn't realize was that from a distance, someone else had begun watching her closely, quietly, but with growing thoughtfulness. It was Julian Blackwood. Julian rarely spent much time in the cold, pristine glass mansion. His life as an artist in San Francisco was a world away, and he seldom concerned himself with his father's domestic affairs. But on this day, fate seemed intent on placing him squarely in the path of what had, until now, been nothing more than whispered rumors. Late in the afternoon, golden light from the setting sun spilled over the long upstairs hallway. Fresh from an unannounced visit, Julian was tired and headed straight for the guest wing, until the sharp, icy tone of Alistair's voice drifted from the master's study. "What on earth are you doing?" Something in his voice, familiar yet unusually harsh, made him slow down and stop outside the door. Through the narrow gap, he saw Isabella standing with her head bowed, trembling hands holding a glass tablet that had a barely visible smudge on the screen. It was one of Alistair's prototypes, a priceless piece of tech. He knew its value, but also that it wasn't worth such fury. "I'm so sorry, sir," Isabella murmured, her voice contrite but steady. "I'll be more careful." Alistair didn't let her finish. His hand shot out, snatching the tablet from her grasp with a sharp movement that nearly made her drop it again. "Careful?" Alistair hissed, his gray eyes flashing. "Do you know what this is worth? You'll never comprehend the technology in this house, Isabella. I'm done tolerating the incompetence and stupidity of people like you." Julian froze. Stunned, he had known his father could be exacting, even cutting, but never had he imagined him being so openly cruel to a household employee. What shocked him even more was Isabella's response. No screaming, no tears, just silent endurance. Placing her hands calmly behind her back, Isabella bowed her head low and said softly, but with quiet resolve, "I understand, sir. I'll do better." Alistair's face twisted with frustration at the lack of reaction. With an irritated grunt, he turned toward the door, nearly colliding with Julian. Their eyes met in a brief, tense moment. Alistair quickly recovered his usual cool facade, but Julian felt something new. Disgust at the look in his father's eyes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calm but weighted. "Nothing," Alistair replied too quickly, his tone edged and defensive. "Just the staff's incompetence." Julian glanced past him at Isabella, who was leaving the room with her head down, hands still trembling, but eyes burning with quiet determination. A strange feeling stirred inside him. Not quite anger, but a sharp curiosity mixed with unease. "I think she understands her mistake," he said slowly, deliberately. "You don't have to be so harsh, Father." For the first time in months, Alistair looked genuinely surprised by his son's pushback. "You don't understand, Julian," he countered coolly. "People like her only perform well if you keep them under strict discipline. Otherwise, they get lazy and sloppy." "People like her?" Julian repeated, his voice tightening, his eyes narrowing with a sudden probing sharpness. Alistair instantly realized his misstep. "I mean, the staff," he amended quickly. They need tighter management." Julian said nothing more, his gaze lingering down the hallway where Isabella had disappeared. The silence seemed to unsettle Alistair. He turned and walked away. But Julian remained where he was, and for the first time in a long time, a deep, disquieting resolve crept into his mind about his father's character. That night, alone in his room, Julian found he couldn't shake the image of Isabella standing still, absorbing an unjust tirade with almost inhuman composure. She was an immigrant, vulnerable, but possessed a resilience he had never witnessed before. It intrigued him, not only about her, but about Alistair, the man he thought he knew so well. Staring out the window, Julian made a quiet decision. Starting tomorrow, he would keep a closer eye on Isabella. Perhaps then he would uncover the truth behind the perfect facade of this mansion and the storms brewing within. From the moment Julian Blackwood accidentally witnessed his father's cruelty toward Isabella, he began watching his household more closely, especially Isabella herself. She was a Filipina woman with a fragile appearance, yet carried an inner strength he couldn't quite define. For Alistair, however, Isabella's silence and unusual resilience only made him more irritated. That unsettling calm felt like defiance, and in Alistair's mind, Isabella became a target who had to be broken. In the days that followed, the Blackwood mansion became a stage for a string of suspicious accidents, all aimed squarely at Isabella. One evening, while she was serving dinner to Alistair and Julian in the lavish dining room, Alistair suddenly stood. With a subtle but deliberate motion, he knocked a bottle of soy sauce over, spilling it across an expensive white silk placemat in a violent dark splash. "Why would you place the bottle in such a stupid spot, Isabella?" Alistair barked, his face a mask of feigned outrage. Every staff member's eyes snapped to Isabella, some wide with alarm. From his seat across the table, Julian studied Isabella, expecting anger, a protest, or even tears. Instead, she simply bent down and quietly blotted the spreading stain. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll be more careful," she said. Calm, controlled, without a hint of resistance, Julian was intrigued, even unsettled. He knew his father's act was intentional, and Isabella seemed to know it too, yet she chose to accept it without revealing a trace of indignation. What force, he wondered, allowed her to endure like this? But Alistair wasn't finished. Days later, as Isabella carefully dusted the living room, Alistair entered carrying a rare piece of hand-blown glass art. He caressed it for a moment before letting it slip from his hands. The priceless heirloom shattered into 100 glittering shards on the slate floor. The crash echoed through the hall, drawing staff to the scene. Alistair turned on Isabella, his fury staged to perfection. "You're so clumsy, Isabella. Do you have any idea what that sculpture was worth? I can't understand why they still keep you here. You're a disgrace to this house." The others froze, casting glances that mixed pity with curiosity. Everyone knew Alistair had done it on purpose, but no one dared to defend Isabella. The silence was thick enough to hear Alistair's quick, angry breaths. Julian, standing just inside his room, saw it all. His fists tightened, his mind swirling with suspicion and disappointment toward his father. Yet again, Isabella's reaction astonished him. Without a word, she crouched, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the fragments. She worked methodically, eyes down, until every sliver was gone. Then she rose, bowed her head slightly, and said in that same steady tone, "I apologize for my carelessness, sir." Alistair stared hard, hunting for a flicker of weakness or rebellion in Isabella's eyes. He found only stillness and an almost frightening dignity. Thwarted and frustrated, he turned sharply and left, leaving Isabella standing tall in the middle of the room. From across the way, Julian couldn't look away from her. Why didn't she cry? Why didn't she fight back? Why was she still here at all? Even the other staff began to see her differently. Where they once looked down on her for her background and her low position, they now felt a grudging respect. Mrs. Finch, the cold, exacting housekeeper, softened her gaze when Isabella passed. Genevieve and Arthur no longer whispered behind her back. They watched her quietly, almost in admiration. Through sheer silence and unshakable endurance, Isabella had shown everyone in the Blackwood mansion that real strength lay not in wealth or power, but in the ability to preserve one's dignity in the harshest circumstances. And that strength was beginning to change how everyone saw her, most of all Julian Blackwood, the estranged son of the most powerful man in the house. In the days that followed, the air inside the Blackwood mansion remained as stifling and tense as ever. Yet something seemed to be shifting, quietly underneath. Isabella didn't realize that her patience and composure had left a small but unmistakable crack in the flawless facade Alistair had worked so hard to maintain. That afternoon, the sky turned gloomy and gray, heavy clouds rolling over the Pacific like a bad omen. Isabella was cleaning the West Wing, a place she rarely went. As she passed a closed door at the end of the hall, she heard something strange, a faint, metallic clatter, followed by a choked sound, soft but laden with pain. She stopped, uneasy. She had never heard a sound like that in this house, least of all from Alistair, who always wore an armor of cold, intimidating poise. Then came a clearer sound, a single, broken word. "Eleanor." Isabella gently nudged the already ajar door a little wider. It was an art studio. Alistair sat there on a simple stool, his usually perfect silver hair now slightly disheveled. His hands trembled as they rested on an unfinished canvas. His shoulders shook with restrained grief. It was the most fragile, vulnerable version of Alistair Isabella had ever seen. When Alistair noticed Isabella, he hurriedly stood, trying and failing to reassemble his icy mask. He turned away, his voice forced into firmness but threaded with hurt. "Who let you in here?" "I'm sorry, sir," Isabella answered softly. "I was cleaning the hall and happened to hear." "Are you all right?" Alistair was silent for a long moment, as if he meant to order Isabella out immediately. But then his shoulders dropped like someone too tired to keep wearing a mask. "You wouldn't understand, Isabella," he whispered, his voice quivering with bitterness. "You could never understand what it feels like to lose the only perfect thing in your life." Isabella froze. It was the first time Alistair had ever spoken to her with true weakness and honesty. Isabella stepped inside slowly, set her cleaning cloth aside, and kept a respectful distance, close enough to show she cared. "Sir, sometimes I do understand." Alistair lifted his eyes, startled, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "My wife, Eleanor—" "She was an artist," Alistair went on, his tone edged with an indescribable sourness. "This house, this perfection, it was all for her. She made it beautiful. Now she's gone, and all I have left are these things." He let out a small, broken sound. "I used to think that if I kept everything perfect, exactly as she left it, it would be like she was still here. But the more I did it, the lonelier and emptier I felt." Isabella listened quietly, and a strange feeling rose in her, something like empathy for the man who had caused her so much pain. Her voice was low, tinged with sorrow. "I know what that feels like, sir, to be trying to hold on to something you can't control." Alistair looked at her, suspicious at first, but the malice in his eyes was gone. Only a sincere curiosity remained. "How could you possibly understand?" Isabella drew a slow breath, speaking clearly, steadily. "I have a brother. His name is Leo. He's 16, and he's been fighting leukemia since he was little. I have nothing, not even enough to pay for his treatment. I've begged doctors to save him, even when I couldn't afford the hospital bills." Her voice tightened, but she kept her calm. "Every day here, every time I endure the cruelty and humiliation, I tell myself I'm doing it for my brother. Because if I can keep this job one more day, then Leo gets one more chance to live." Silence fell over the room. Alistair looked at Isabella as if, for the first time, he truly saw her. Not as a poor caregiver, not as an immigrant to be scorned, but as a sister, fierce and selfless. I didn't know," Alistair said at last, his voice shaking with remorse. "I always thought you were." Isabella gently shook her head, sparing her the rest. "I understand, sir. Everyone carries their own grief, but sometimes life forces us to see someone else's. I've been used to that for a long time." Alistair went quiet again, staring at the unfinished painting where the gray clouds were thinning, letting through the last pale light of day. For the first time in his life, he felt a genuine sense of shame before Isabella, the woman he had most despised. And for the first time, Alistair realized that perhaps he was the truly weak one in this house. That afternoon, after Isabella left the studio having shared her heartfelt story about her gravely ill brother, Alistair remained seated in silence by the window for a long time. For the first time in his life, he felt a strange mix of shame and genuine compassion, emotions he had never allowed himself to feel before. That night, Alistair lay awake, unable to sleep. The image of Isabella's sorrowful eyes and her trembling voice as she spoke about Leo kept replaying in his mind, filling him with a deep, gnawing guilt. Every cruel act, every word of humiliation he had hurled at Isabella now made him ask himself, "How did I become this person?" He thought back to his early days, a poor boy from a rough neighborhood, always plagued by the feeling that he didn't belong. The insults from the wealthy elite had etched themselves into his memory over the years. Alistair is just a brute, a tech nerd with no class, nothing more. Those words had driven him to build the cold, cutting facade that shielded his vulnerabilities. But now, faced with Isabella, a poor woman with an unbreakable heart, Alistair realized he had lost himself long ago. The next morning, Isabella rose early as usual, bracing for another grueling day. But when she stepped into the kitchen, Mrs. Finch unexpectedly handed her a small white envelope. Her stern face softened just slightly. "The master says open it now," Mrs. Finch said briefly before turning away. Isabella's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were a few crisp bills and a note written in Alistair's familiar, sharp script. "Take today off. Go see your brother. This is for travel and to buy something for Leo." For a moment, Isabella felt her heart stop. She read the note over and over, barely able to believe her eyes. For the first time since she'd entered the Blackwood mansion, she felt a genuine kindness from the man she had thought the coldest, most unfeeling person alive. Without hesitation, Isabella quickly gathered a few small items and left for the hospital where Leo was being treated. Throughout the journey, her mind swirled with confusing but warm thoughts of Alistair and this sudden change in him. At the hospital, Isabella entered the small room where Leo lay on a simple bed. The boy was frail, his face pale, but his eyes lit up instantly when she saw her. "At," Leo called, his voice weak but full of joy, using the Tagalog word for older sister. Isabella rushed forward, pulling him into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her thin face, tears of happiness and longing. It had been weeks since she could visit, and each time she'd only seen Leo through a phone screen, her heart broke. But today, thanks to Alistair's unexpected gesture, she could hold her brother close and feel his warmth. "I missed you so much, Ate," Leo whispered, his tears soaking into Isabella's shoulder. I was scared you wouldn't come back. I'm always here for you, Leo, Isabella murmured, stroking his hair. I will never leave you, no matter what. In that moment, Isabella felt a deep gratitude for Alistair's unexpected kindness. She began to see that behind the coldness and cruelty might be a heart wounded and in need of healing. That evening, back at the mansion, Isabella quietly returned to her duties, as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, she couldn't forget the silent generosity she had received that day. On the other side of the vast house, Alistair sat in his private study, staring at a photograph of his late wife. For the first time in years, he saw a different man in his reflection, one filled with insecurity, scars, and someone who had strayed far from who he truly was. He thought of Isabella, of Leo, of the boundless sacrifice of a poor sister enduring every bitterness for her brother. And he asked himself whether he had the courage to face himself and change, or whether he would keep living in the false armor he had built. Alistair stood, walked to the window, and gazed out over the sprawling cliffs fading into the night. A new feeling stirred within her, a yearning to change, to live truthfully. And in that moment, he knew that while many challenges still lay ahead, he was no longer truly alone. Because for the first time, he understood that genuine compassion was the one true force capable of healing even the deepest wounds. In the days following her visit to Leo at the hospital, Isabella began to notice a strange but undeniable change in Alistair. The sharp glares and cutting words that once felt like blades were gone, replaced by softer looks and small, considerate gestures she had never seen from the powerful man before. One morning, as Isabella was carefully organizing the books in the library, Alistair appeared behind her with an unusually thoughtful expression, his gray eyes distant, as if weighing something carefully. "Isabella," he said, his tone calm, so different from the icy edge of the past. "Yes, sir," Isabella replied cautiously, turning toward her. Alistair hesitated, something rare for a man so used to being decisive. At last, his voice softened, carrying a sincerity Isabella had never heard before. "Tomorrow night, my son is hosting an important charity gala at a gallery in the city. I want you to come with me." Isabella froze. She could hardly believe her ears. Never had she imagined Alistair Blackwood, the very man who had made her life so painful, would extend such an invitation. Stammering, she said, "Sir, I'm just a caregiver. I don't think I belong in a place like that." Alistair held her gaze, his voice steady and serious. "Isabella, you belong there. In fact, you're the one who needs this event more than anyone." With that, he turned and left, leaving Isabella standing in quiet bewilderment, but also with a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time in her life of hardship and sacrifice, Isabella felt true respect from someone she'd never thought capable of it. The next evening, Isabella wore a simple yet elegant dress Alistair had quietly arranged for her. Standing before the mirror, she barely recognized herself. A woman of dignity and strength. No longer the powerless, impoverished girl she once was. When she came downstairs, Alistair was already waiting in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His eyes flicked over Isabella with barely concealed satisfaction. "You look beautiful, Isabella. Let's go." The charity gala was held in a chic, minimalist art gallery, glowing with track lighting and filled with soft music and polite conversation. Isabella's steps faltered slightly in the presence of so many wealthy, influential guests, but Alistair's confident presence beside her steadied her. Alistair led her to a circle of prominent guests, major donors, renowned doctors, and leading philanthropists in California. What stunned Isabella most was how Alistair introduced her. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Isabella Reyes, the strongest woman I've ever met. She's an extraordinary sister doing everything she can to save her little brother's life. Every eye turned toward Isabella, filled with warmth and respect. A distinguished older man with kind eyes approached, smiling gently. "Hello, Isabella. I'm Dr. Marcus Thorne, representing the Phoenix Foundation. Your story touches me deeply. How can we help you and your brother?" Isabella hesitated, her heart pounding. From behind, Alistair's gentle, encouraging gaze urged her on. Finally, Isabella spoke with quiet honesty. "My brother Leo has a severe form of leukemia. I just want him to have the transplant he needs so he can live like other teenagers. But I can't afford the cost." Dr. Thorne's expression softened into resolute compassion. "I understand. Our foundation can cover all the expenses: hospital bills, medication, the transplant, and post-operative care. Everything." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. She stood frozen, unable to speak. A gentle hand rested on her shoulder. It was Alistair. Isabella turned toward the man she had once feared and hated, now filled only with silent gratitude. Alistair's voice was warm and unguarded. "I've done many wrong things, Isabella, but I hope this can help me make amends." "Sir," Isabella replied, her voice trembling, "you've given me the most precious gift I could ever hope for. I don't know how to thank you enough." Alistair shook his head and offered the most genuine smile Isabella had ever seen. "No, Isabella. It's I who should thank you. Because of you, I finally see how wrong I've been all these years." And in that moment, beneath the gentle light of the grand art gallery, the two people, once worlds apart, stood side by side, united by compassion, understanding, and a shared hope for a new future. After the magical evening at the art gallery, everything in Isabella's life began to change. The heavy, suffocating air that once filled the Blackwood mansion seemed to lift little by little, replaced by hope, trust, and a deep gratitude that had never existed there before. A few days after the charity event, Isabella received an important phone call from the hospital. The gentle voice of Dr. Marcus Thorne came through the line. "We've completed all the arrangements, Isabella. Leo's transplant will be on Monday morning. The Phoenix Foundation will cover everything. Your brother will soon be healthy again." The moment she heard the news, Isabella sank into a chair, her hands trembling around her small phone. Joy, relief, and gratitude flooded her so completely that she couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, she truly believed in miracles. From the hallway, Alistair stood quietly, watching. A small, bittersweet smile touched his lips, but he didn't step forward or speak. He simply observed, feeling an unfamiliar peace. For the first time in his life, he knew he was doing something truly right. On Monday morning, Isabella woke early, preparing to head to the hospital. For the first time since she'd arrived at the mansion, every staff member greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. Mrs. Finch, the strict housekeeper, had prepared breakfast for her and gave a small nod as she passed. "Good luck, Isabella. We're all praying for your brother." Genevieve, the famously stern cook, looked at her with kindness for the first time. "Trust the doctors, Isabella. Leo will be fine." Arthur, the chauffeur who had once been openly skeptical, offered to drive her himself. "I'll wait here for you, Isabella." "Don't worry," he said sincerely. On the drive, Isabella thought of Alistair. She knew that all the positive changes she'd experienced recently had started with him. The powerful man had quietly made everything possible for her and Leo, asking for nothing in return. The surgery took hours, each minute feeling like an eternity. Isabella sat in the hospital corridor, hands clasped tightly together, silently praying for her little brother. Finally, the operating room doors opened and Dr. Thorne stepped out, relief in his smile. The transplant went perfectly, Isabella. Leo will recover and be healthy soon. Isabella broke down in tears right there in the hallway, her face lit with joy and gratitude. After all the hardship, she could finally see her brother with a chance to live, to have the life every teenager deserved. That afternoon, when she returned to the Blackwood mansion, she was surprised to see Alistair waiting for her at the entrance. The reclusive master, once so cold and harsh, now looked at her with genuine warmth. "Leo's all right?" Alistair asked softly, his tone free of pretense. "Yes, sir. The surgery was a success. I don't know how to thank you enough, Mr. Blackwood." Alistair shook his head, his gaze steady and full of understanding. "Isabella, I don't need your thanks. I should be thanking you. You've helped me realize so many things I was wrong about in my life." In the days that followed, the shift in the house spread beyond Isabella and Alistair. It touched everyone on staff. The suspicion and coldness of the past vanished, replaced with sincere care and respect. Even Julian Blackwood, the estranged son, began to visit more often, seeing the change in his father. One afternoon, he met her in the garden and, for the first time, spoke with genuine admiration. "I'm glad to know your brother is healthy again, Isabella, and I'm grateful for everything you've endured here. You deserve the respect and thanks of everyone in this house." Isabella smiled gently, her heart full of peace and gratitude. She knew that all these miracles had begun with the deep change inside Alistair, the man who had once caused her so much pain, yet had become the greatest benefactor of her life. And in that moment, Isabella understood. True strength isn't in power, wealth, or appearances. It lies in the ability to love, forgive, and truly understand one another. These were lessons that she and Alistair had both suffered greatly to learn. The transformation within the Blackwood mansion was quiet but unmistakable. What had once seemed impossible was now reality. No more condescending stares, no more whispered insults behind Isabella's back. In their place were genuine respect, friendly looks, and even gentle smiles she never thought she'd find in this house. Even Isabella was surprised by the change. But what astonished her most was Alistair's evolving attitude. The man who had once caused her so much pain was becoming the strongest source of support she had in this vast home. On a Monday morning, while Isabella was busy with her usual duties, Mrs. Finch approached with her usual formality, but her eyes carried an unfamiliar softness. "The master wants to see you in his study immediately, Isabella." A flicker of worry passed through Isabella, but she steadied herself and walked to the study. Alistair sat behind his desk, serious, yet for the first time, his eyes held warmth. "Sit down, Isabella," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. Isabella took the seat opposite, her hands resting on her lap to steady her nerves. She didn't know what Alistair intended to say, but deep down she sensed this meeting would mark a turning point in her life. Alistair began, his voice clear and assured. "I've been thinking a lot these past days, Isabella. I realize I made a terrible mistake in how I treated you before. More importantly, I see that you are the one who's brought the most positive change to this house." For a moment, Isabella sat frozen, eyes wide with surprise and emotion. "Starting today," Alistair continued, his tone deepening with sincerity, "I want you to manage this entire estate. You'll take over Mrs. Finch's responsibilities in overseeing daily operations. This isn't just a promotion, it's the respect you truly deserve." Isabella felt her heart stop for an instant. She had never imagined reaching such a position, especially in the very house where she had once endured so much humiliation. "Sir, she stammered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've earned it, Isabella," Alistair said with a soft smile and an encouraging gaze. "You've shown that real strength lies in persistence and kindness. I trust you." At that moment, the door opened and Julian Blackwood entered. His face was serious but carried a rare trace of emotion. For the first time since Isabella began working here, he spoke with genuine clarity. "I agree completely with my father, Isabella. I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for this family. You've helped us restore true peace to our home." Julian stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of profound gratitude and respect. "Thank you so much, Isabella. You are truly a priceless gift we've been fortunate to have." Tears slid down Isabella's cheeks. Bowing her head, she said softly, "I'm the one who should thank you both for letting me stay, for saving my brother. I can't express how deeply grateful I am." Alistair nodded gently, his eyes warmer than ever. "We only did what was right, Isabella, and now I have one more surprise for you." He took out a small key card and placed it in Isabella's hand with a tender smile. "From now on, you'll move into the guest house here on the estate. It has everything you need. You'll be far more comfortable." Isabella stared at the little key card in her palm, too moved for words. Just months ago, she had been despised and humiliated in this house. Now she was receiving true respect, a position of leadership, and a fully equipped home where her brother could soon live with her. That very afternoon, she moved her few belongings into the guest house. It was spacious and airy, with simple yet tasteful furnishings Alistair had quietly arranged. From the window, Isabella could see the mansion's peaceful cliffs in full view. Standing there, she felt a profound shift in her life. She had not only gained a better job and a more comfortable home, she had regained her sense of worth, something she thought had been lost forever. In that moment, Isabella silently thanked Alistair and Julian Blackwood, and even the painful trials she had endured, because she now understood. Sometimes, the greatest gifts in life come from the most unlikely places.